Hey everybody, I'm Emma and I'm here with Jenna today and we're going to talk about mods, which I had never heard of before Jenna mentioned it to me like a couple months ago and I was like, oh, we have to do a webinar on that. So I'm going to learn what it is today with everybody else. So really quickly, just a couple of pieces of housekeeping. Please hold all like questions till the end, and then if you have comments, just save them for the YouTube video like comment section. And then we are recording this, and the recording will be emailed out to everybody tomorrow. And then please, we've got a bunch of people in here, just stay muted. Really quickly, Backlog is the name of my company. We do archival consulting, and we are putting on this webinar today, and Jenna works with us as a consultant. So we do a lot of archival needs assessments, which is like, hey, we've got these problems, we don't know how to solve them, then we can kind of create a roadmap for that. We also can write policies and procedures, as well as kind of figure out how to set up a whole digitization framework for you. So I'm Emma. I founded Backlog in 2021, and then I'm going to hand it over to Jenna from here.
Hi, I'm Jenna. I am a museum archivist and I have been exploring mods for the past couple of months. So I'm definitely speaking to you not as an expert, but as a person who's learning along with you. 'Cause I was not familiar with it and I have been learning by reading manuals. So hopefully I'll be able to present that information in a more engaging way than a technical document today. Yeah, let's get started. Next slide, please. So the scope of this is I'm going to talk a little bit about metadata schemas and what they are. If you are familiar with Dublin Core, then some of this might feel familiar to you. I'm going to talk about how mods compares to Dublin Core, and a little bit about how it compares to MARC records. If you're not familiar with metadata schemas or MARC cataloging, then you might be a bit along for the ride for this, but that's okay. I did do a webinar about Dublin Core a couple of years ago that's on the Backlog YouTube. So if that might help, check it out. But just let it wash over you if you're not sure what's going on. So I like to talk about why mods, how I kind of came by it, why it exists. And then I'm just going to go through the top level mods elements. So there are more of them than you would have than you have in Dublin Core. So I'm just going to go through, talk about how they compare to Dublin Core fields and the types of information that they capture. Next slide, please. All right. So hopefully this diagram makes sense to other people because I'm just trying to get the idea of what is a metadata schema out of my brain. What is a metadata schema versus what is a content standard versus what is a controlled vocabulary. So this model is actually based on Dublin Core since we haven't actually talked about mods yet. So, I mean, a schema is a methodology for standardizing the information that's gathered and presented about any sort of resource. It's what fields that we use, that we fill out, like the title, the creator, and directions for how to fill those out. So I've got a couple of fields in these sort of ovals in the diagram. So it's just some of the Dublin Core fields, the title, the creator, the description, and the subjects. And then some of the colored text in those fields refers to two different controlled vocabularies, the Library of Congress name authority file and the art and architecture thesaurus. A controlled vocabulary standardizes how we talk about common concepts, whether those are people or objects or places. So, and they can get very specialized. I've also done a controlled vocabulary webinar, so check that out too. This is turning into my greatest hits. So you use a controlled vocabulary within the fields of a metadata schema, and then a content standard like DAX, which is describing archives, a content standard. It's sort of a manual for how you write that information. What sources do you use to find the right title or creator? If you have to supply a title, how do you go about doing that if something doesn't have a title of its own? You know, when you get the recording, maybe keep coming back to this diagram. I hope it helps. But that is how these different concepts interact. You don't use a metadata schema or a controlled vocabulary or a content standard. You use all of them in archival description. and they all intersect. Next slide, please. So MODS, the Metadata Object Description Standard, was first released in 2002, and there were a lot of new languages and ways of talking about data that were emerging around the same time. Dublin Core was released in 1998. Encoded Archival Description, or EAD, was released about this time. The EAD 2002 edition that came out, obviously, in 2002 was in use for over a decade after that. So that was kind of the main one. I think there had been kind of a preliminary EAD before that. DAX was adopted 2004, 2005. And ISAD-G, which is the General International Standard for Archival Description, that came out around 1999, 2000. So right around Y2K, we were really thinking about how can we encode metadata, information about information differently, and present it in a way that people can understand, but also computers can understand. Next slide, please. So I think I also did not say the acronym correctly with the last slide, but it's Metadata Object Description Schema, not standard. It's because I've been saying DAX so much. So this standard is designed to be more user-friendly than MARC because it's semantic tagging. So the name of a tag is title or name. Whereas, in MARC cataloging, because it was built with early computers, you have those numbered fields. So you've got your 100 field, your 300 field, your notes field is the 500 field, and then you've it's all designed to be read by some very early computers. But we have XML now, so we can encode our data in a way that is understandable both for people and machines at the same time. So it's more user-friendly than MARC, but it's also more detailed than Dublin Core. It has a couple extra fields, and it encodes a little bit more information. The sequence of the elements does not matter. So unlike with MARC cataloging, where you've got to, you have all of those fields, 100, the 300, the 500, the 679, all in one order. It doesn't matter with mods. And there are 20 top level fields compared to the 15 in Dublin Core, with sub elements and qualifications possible. And when I say top level, those are like if you imagine a hierarchy of tags, those are the ones at the top of the hierarchy are the top level ones. You can have tags within tags, so the sub elements. So those are the non-required and less important types of tags. And I'm not going to be going over those today because they're not universally needed. So we're just going to go over the basics today. We're going to go through those 20. Next slide, please. So I was curious about this because we have been trying to implement Preservica at my workplace, just kind of playing around with it. I'm the only archivist. So I saw that I could download a mods template or a Dublin Core template from Preservica. And so I knew nothing about mods, so I started digging into it. And because I had never worked with it before, and so I wanted to understand why I would use that instead of Dublin Core. And there are crosswalks between Dublin Core and MARC, only for unqualified Dublin Core. If you've ever used a more complex version of Dublin Core that has a lot of like modified fields, there isn't quite a crosswalk. And these crosswalks are not one-to-one relationships. So the information in one Dublin Core field is not necessarily going to be the exact information that would go in a mods field. You might be breaking that information up or framing it a little bit differently, as we'll kind of see as we go through. That might make a little bit more sense. And so the Library of Congress, which kind of administers mods, they have the official crosswalks between Dublin Core and MARC. So if you needed to convert a metadata record from one schema to the other, you could do that. So all of the top level fields are repeatable except for record info. These Elements can have attributes to characterize the information further. So that's usually like if you've seen an XML tag before, you'd have, the opening caret, and then it would say the name of the element, like title, and then it might say type equals whatever, or date equals whatever. Or, with a date, if you're normalizing the date and you say open the tag, date, normal equals, and then you have the date in the international standard format before you write it out. So some elements also have possible sub-elements, as I mentioned before, to provide more specific information. And all of that is in the official mods release, which is on the Library of Congress website. Next slide, please. So let's get into it. So your title information goes into title info. And you're going to either record the title as it exists, or you're going to supply a title in accordance with a content standard like AACR2, Catalog and Cultural Objects, DAX, or RDA. And so those are content standards for archives, museum objects, as well as bibliographic materials. So the way that you kind of make up a title for something that doesn't have one might vary a little bit. Obviously, this is a one-to-one relationship. It crosswalks to the title field in Dublin Core. This one's pretty straightforward. Next slide, please. So name is a top-level tag, but then can also be used elsewhere whenever you're encoding a name, perhaps as a name like as a subject or in another field, in like within a paragraph of information. So we're talking about it as the creator or author field here. It's the personal or corporate names of the entity, singular or multiple, that are associated with or responsible for creating the resource. You can use sub-elements to define roles, such as, like, are we talking about the author? Or are we talking about the illustrator, the translator, the editor? And then the name field crosswalks to the Dublin Core creator and or contributor fields. So you're going to be, regardless of how someone has contributed, you're going to be using the name tag to talk about all of those people. And then you're going to use your sub-elements or attributes to define what those roles are. Whereas in Dublin Core, you separate out creator versus contributor. Next slide, please. The type of resource is just, what is it? Is it a book? Is it an image? Is it video? Is it a chair? Library of Congress recommends using its resource types schema, where it actually has a controlled vocabulary of like what terms are we using for resource types, because you mean even with something as simple as a book, well, are we saying book or are we saying monograph? So there is a controlled vocabulary that they recommend you use when you are putting information into this field. This is one of two elements that crosswalks to type in Dublin Core. Next slide, please. Genre is a more specific characterizing information than the type of resource, whereas the type of resource talks about the thing itself, sort of the carrier of information. Genre is about the content. So we're talking about fiction, or your type of resource could be, it's a moving image, and your genre might be animation, or you might have, a book and it's fiction, or a book, it's biography. This also crosswalks to type in Dublin Core. Next slide, please. The origin info covers the information about the place, publication, responsibility that's associated with the origin of the resource, which is the same as the publisher field in Dublin Core. But you can also include attributes, attribute event types. So you might say the origin info type equals publication, or distribution, or digitization. So you can include lots of information about not just say when the book was published, but when it was digitized or when a new edition came out. There are sub-elements for information like the place it was published, the date, the agent, copyright information, and other types of other characterizations regarding the origin of a resource. Next slide, please. So language, straightforward, same as the Dublin Core language field. Obviously not everything has linguistic content. You know, if you've got just a photograph with nothing written on it, then you might be ignoring this field. You can also specify the script of the language, like Cyrillic, for example. I recommend using a controlled vocabulary such as the ISO 639, which just standardizes the names of languages. So, you know, it's the one where you've got like FRE for French, ENG for English. But, you know, some languages in their own language, when they talk about themselves, it's a very different word from what it is in English. So I would just recommend using controlled vocabulary there. Next slide, please. Physical description describes the physical characteristics, including the extent, you know, like how many folders is it, the form, any reformatting information, like is this something that has been microfilmed, and all of this crosswalks to format in Dublin Core. Next slide, please. And actually, you could also put some of the physical description in the description field in Dublin Core. That's not official, but I think depending on the information you have, you probably could do that. Sorry, there's a little footnote. The abstract is what an abstract is, a succinct summary of the content of the resource, which we don't do in Dublin Core. But if you were trying to convert this information, it would probably go in the description field. And this is where you really start to see how mods embraces a wider swath of information than a MARC record or a Dublin Core record. And like you could probably describe an archival collection at the collection level using a mods record if you were not interested or able to do full EAD finding aids. You have a few more options to describe a top level collection using mods. Next slide, please. So table of contents, also not a field in Dublin Core. You'd probably put it in the description, but you may have seen bibliographic records, you know, in a library catalog record that includes the table of contents, like in the 500 field. So this is where you would put chapters in a book, tracks in a musical recording, things like that. Of course, a lot of resources don't need a table of contents if you're, you know, describing a photo. So you wouldn't have to, I can see my cat and just a little pause in the background. Excuse, that's the cat tax. She seeks immortality through YouTube. So a lot of things don't have a table of contents, but you don't have to use this field or any field that isn't relevant. Next slide, please. So the target audience, also something that we do not use in Dublin Core or with archival materials. So this is really geared towards books. This is where you would talk about the intellectual level of the intended audience. So you might be talking about juvenile literature, you know, children's lit, or adolescent, or perhaps it's highly technical literature and, you know, it's physicists. So not something that we come across a lot in archives, but the field is there. Next slide, please. So the note field, very broad. I think of it like a MARC 500 field, the description field in Dublin Core, or in EAD, it's that odd field, that other archival description, which I just love that we call it the odd field. So it's anything that doesn't fit anywhere else. You can always write a note. And of course, the note fields are repeatable. So you can have all of the fields, except for record info, are repeatable. So you can have many notes. Next slide, please. Subject, we're familiar with this from Dublin Core. So these are the topics that are covered in the content of the resource. So we're talking about the content, not the form. Sub-elements can include geographic or temporal information, as well as occupations or just topics. And Dublin Core has that coverage field where you might put geographic information. So there is, other than subject, some of this information might be crosswalked to coverage in Dublin Core. But otherwise, it's pretty, you know, we're working with metadata. You talk about subjects a lot. So this is one is pretty familiar. Next slide, please. So classification officially crosswalks to subject in Dublin Core, which I find interesting, but it does make sense. So this is the designation of a resource in a formal system of coding and organizing resources. So this would be like the Library of Congress call number or the Dewey Decimal Number, not your local, if you're using any sort of local cataloging numbering system, this classification is for standardized systems in order to align the resource with existing methods of classification. So if you're describing a photograph or a unique archival collection, you're probably not going to need this. But if you are describing a bibliographic resource, then you might be adding the Library of Congress or the Dewey Decimal Number to this record in this way. Next slide, please. Related item is something that I feel like we really only talk about it in finding aids. You might see that here's some related stuff at our institution or at other institutions. Here are other archival collections related to these people or these events. So in this field, you describe other resources that are related to this one. All mods elements can appear here as sub-elements. So you can, for example, be adding title information and classification information for another resource within related items. So that's kind of what hopefully this illustrates the point a little better about the top level resource, top level tags. We have the literal top level of tags talking about this resource, but those tags and some other tags can also be used in other places to talk about more specific things. You can use the related item field to just link to other metadata records. And as you can imagine, Dublin Core has no equivalent field for this. So I guess you throw it in the description field, which is kind of, like the note field. We just put everything that we can't really fit anywhere else into that field. Next slide, please. So the identifier, exactly the same as in Dublin Core. This is a unique standardized number or code that exists only for this resource. The field is repeatable because a resource might have different numbers in different systems. So like you might have an accession number for an item as it comes into your collection and a catalog number. So it's not because the identifier is not unique. It's because one unique item might have multiple also unique identifiers. So this is where you would put your local classification information instead of in the classification field. Next slide, please. So as a top level element, location describes actually the institution holding the resource or its physical/electronic location. It's not talking about the subject of the resource or where it was published. This actually crosswalks to the identifier field in Dublin Core, oddly, because it refers to where it is, not where it's about, if that hopefully makes sense. So this is where you'd have the information about like this collection's held at this particular library or special collections or museum. Whereas the subject of the collection, let's say it's New York City or Rhode Island or St. Louis, that information is not going to be here. It's going to be in the subject field. Next slide, please. So the access condition is something that we also don't really talk about in Dublin Core as much. I guess it would crosswalk to the rights field, but I feel like we're familiar if we write finding aids talking about the access conditions. Who can access this? Can the public come in and make an appointment? Is this restricted in any particular way? How do you make an appointment? Do you do drop-ins? Is it digitally accessible? So this is the conditions concerning access and use that we would have in a finding aid, but we're actually including it in this type of record. So yeah, I don't actually even think that the crosswalk to the rights field is official. I mean, everyone can go read the manual and prove me wrong, but I think that's probably the closest. But that's kind of what I mean about like how a crosswalk isn't an exact one-to-one analogy. They're not quite equivalent fields. Next slide, please. So part is for dividing up a resource. If you're trying to talk about just a section of a larger resource, so maybe just one issue of a serial run or a short story from a collection. Again, not an official Dublin Core crosswalk for this, but you might use the relation field in Dublin Core to mention the larger resource. So you'd be saying like this one journal is actually part of there's another record for the full serial run, but here we're just describing one particular issue. Next slide, please. Extension is the catch-all for any information that's not covered by mods. Then you add the type, so it'd be extension type equals, and then there are options to define the information being added. So it's not just extension, wall of weird text. And I also think of this kind of like the odd tag in EAD. Next slide, please. So record info, our one non-repeatable field, also does not have a Dublin Core equivalent. This is where you're going to record administrative provenance information, particularly if it's only relevant to the host institution. So, you might decide that you're not going to display this in your digital asset management system or your catalog. So you can talk about gift information or who processed a collection. So it's just a little bit more about where, not just where the resource comes from, but where the record itself comes from. So it's metadata. Next slide, please. So those are the 20 fields. But where does this all go? Like you've got tags. Are you typing this out? So you can type all of these tags out with the little carets, and you're putting it in an XML file, and you are somehow in whatever system you have, you are attaching that to like a digital object or a catalog record. So maybe you've got Preservica or a museum system or even a library catalog where you're able to attach an XML file and you can include all the metadata in that. But you also might be putting this information into a cataloging interface in software like Preservica. So I can add the mods template to a record, and it will pull up these 20 fields and then some extra ones actually. And I can enter in just type the information in, and it's a graphical user interface that's very easy to use. But then, of course, in Preservica and in a lot of other systems, you can also upload metadata in batches. So maybe it's a spreadsheet with the 20 fields, and then we save it as a CSV, and then we upload a big batch into our cataloging system. So you probably would not be using mods in conjunction with other standards. So if you have a bunch of stuff that's described already, like in Dublin Core or with finding aids or books in a catalog, you don't need to also add a mods record. So this is just another option for if you are embarking on cataloging something, or perhaps you want to eventually switch over to using mods. You can start here, but mods isn't something that you need to go back and add to your, like, we've all got enough work to do. But if you're starting working with a new system, perhaps you might decide, well, instead of Dublin Core, our official standard is going to be mods. And if you do adopt this as your standard, I think it's a good idea, whenever you adopt a standard, to write a local manual for your local usage so that you can kind of guide people in your institution, other archivists or librarians or your interns or student workers or volunteers, and help them use it and give them specific examples that are related to your institution. And you could talk about, say, specific ways that you want to format the record information that are very specific to how your gift process works, for example. You can give examples that are very specific to the focus of your collection or your museum, so that people have lots of examples to work from, say, talking about like ships or something like that. So I think it's really helpful to write a local usage. It's basically your own local content standard that's in alignment with other content standards on how to actually implement and execute any metadata schema. that will save a lot of work and also make sure that everyone has the same understanding of how these fields work and how they should apply them to the materials in your collection. So that's my piece. So I know there's a lot of information really fast with no pictures because how do you illustrate an XML tag? So I think we've got a little bit of housekeeping and I can try to answer questions if you have any.
So we'll do questions in just 1 second, but like Jenna said kind of throughout it that we did one on Dublin Core. We did a webinar on controlled vocabularies, and they're all on our YouTube channel if you want to take a look. Our next webinar is actually next Monday. It's on Sandboard maps and how to use them for research. And then the next one is later in July, and it's on fixity and Bagot, so that pertains more to digital files. And then Jenna is going to host one on DAX, so describing archives, a content standard, in August. And then also in September, she's going to do one on less process, more product. But if anybody has any questions, we don't have a chat tonight. So you do have to unmute and actually ask the question. And we do ask that if you have like a comment, to save it and put it in the comments on the recorded video. But we're super happy to answer any questions that you might have. So if you're using mods in Preservica, are you using it in place of Dublin Core
Yeah.
or in addition to?
In place of, you could if you wanted to, but why would you want to?
A
Have to do.
lot of labor, yeah.
It's just another option.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then does mods have any any like what's the upside to using mods over DAX? Like, do you see one?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you can kind of, I think it would be faster. Like if you're describing an archival collection, um, you could describe it in mods rather than using DAX to write a full finding aid. Probably much quicker. It wouldn't be quite too stable, but also at the same time, like you could still use the DAX content standard to guide the information that you put in mods. But it's obviously it's a lot less detailed than encoding something in EAD. Like if you're gonna take the time to encode something, EAD and mods are both XML languages, and you're gonna get a lot more detail with an EAD record. But maybe, and I don't know all the systems that are out there, but there might be systems that can handle mods and can't handle EAD. Since mods is a bit more bibliographically focused, if you just have a library catalog, I don't really know if if there are situations where that would be relevant. But it's just another choice. What
Got
are the plethora of things that are out there? And I think it does lean a little bit more bibliographic as it's more of a replacement for MARC than Dublin Core perhaps. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know if anybody on here, is using mods actively and has like an operation for describing things in mods.
Yeah.
Uh,
Um,
this is just
Sue,
learning about it.
yeah. Sue, do you want to go ahead and mute and fire away?
Yeah, sure. No, thank you. So I have for years been hearing about how great mods is, and every time I see it, I've seen a few demos and it's like, wow, yeah, this looks really great. But I have yet to actually seen anyone use it like at any workplace that I'm in. Like they're either doing MARC for bibliographic records and or as an archivist, we're using a space and so I'm kind of confused just, and forgive my ignorance, but like where it fits into this, because it seems like this great thing that nobody I know is using it.
And I'm in kind of a weird situation. I've only ever had jobs where I'm a solo archivist, so I'm just always playing around with stuff. So I've been experimenting with using it for describing digital records. So our Preservica is pretty much just born digital records rather than digitized materials. But we're not really replacing anything. I'm just starting anew with this system. So there's not really much, it's not like I'm replacing Dublin Core with mods. I'm just kind of playing around and seeing what works and what sticks.
Yeah, for new stuff that you're doing. Yeah.
So I don't know of any examples of people definitely hardcore using mods in their institutions. They're like that, like that's their standard for what they implement. But that's how I'm using it. I'm experimenting with it for digital records. But
Okay,
then
interesting.
there is also lots of metadata that you can capture about digital records and other metadata schemas.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Holly, I think you're next if you want to unmute for a second.
Hey there, can you hear me?
Almost.
Okay. Yeah, one of my main questions was also like, when do you choose to use this over something else? And the only place I've ever used it was when we had Islandora and they used mods for that. But I was like, but why this and not something else? I don't know why.
It seems like that's the big question tonight, right? Like, where does it fit into everything? You know? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it captures and it just captures information differently, and it's a really squishy and sort of qualitative question of does this fit your institution and your goals for describing things better than anything else. Dublin Core is certainly easier and faster, but particularly if you're trying to capture bibliographic information or say like that information about like target audience and or parts, if you've got like lots of serial runs to talk about, then this offers more than Dublin Core does.
Yeah. And I really think that like kind of the webinar tonight is to like more explore it and to kind of understand it better than to promote it per se. And so I don't think we have like a great argument. Like we're not trying to like gain your vote here on it, unfortunately. And so I think that's why we're like, well,
Yeah,
so I
so
hope
how you
that,
feel.
yeah. Um, Evan, do you want to unmute and
Yeah, one place where I used mods was in a recent work environment where I was aggregating records from digital collections from libraries and archives for the Digital Public Library of America. And we would harvest records from all these different, item level, generally described digital collections, aggregate them, and they were coming mostly from Dublin Core, but sometimes mods, sometimes other formats. And we were crosswalking it to mods because it was a lot more granular than Dublin Core. So you could say, okay, this subject string is from Library of Congress subject headings. This is from the Thesaurus of Graphic Materials. This is from, AAT. So you could specify it in that way. And thereby, like the thinking was down the line, the Digital Public Library of America would then be able to use that information about the authority to further enrich the string to turn it into linked open data. Has that happened? Not quite yet, but so that might be one reason you would use mods. It's just a little bit more granular, a little bit more specific than Dublin Core.
did you have a question?
No,
Or
I
is it
just
to kind of
wanted to like chime in and say that's how I've seen it used.
Okay,
great. Just wanted to make sure we weren't missing
Yeah.
anything there.
yeah, yeah, 'cause I have not explored linked open data. I think it, might be the future. Yeah, so that makes sense. So I hadn't thought about how mods could lead to that. So that's useful information.
James, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, a quick question. I'm new to the field and I'm wondering, I just keep remembering my 6th grade music teacher who said that if you learn the clarinet, you can learn the saxophone, but if you start with the saxophone, you can't play the clarinet. And I'm sorry, this is a bad metaphor, but I'm just wondering the relationship, if there is one, between the new mods and the old Dublin and the rest. So I can sort of focus my study in a way that'll be applicable over time moving.
Yeah, this is just another option. And, and this is, this has been around about the same amount of time as Dublin Core. It's just different. I mean, Dublin Core is definitely more common. But this is another option. Just like you can decide if you're going to catalog books using MARC, the MARC, like numerical fields or MARC XML. You can catalog things in a number of different ways. So it's really just what works for your institution. And this is definitely not going to replace Dublin Core. This is just it's just another metadata schema.
I think like really, really rudimentary like analogy here might be like a screwdriver or like like a Phillips head versus like a flathead. Like you kind of need to know what they both do in order to decide which one fits. But like you can use both of them, but not obviously on the same thing. And so sometimes it's like really great. This is a bad analogy, but to like understand everything so then you can decide like what works best for your collection. And so, and also kind of like with both, you don't have to memorize them. So anyways, okay, so I think we're gonna wrap up questions here. And Evan, thank you
Thank you.
for kind of explaining a little bit more about where you've used it, because I think all we've kind of heard is like Preservica and Islandora, which I didn't even know before tonight also. But thank you everybody for bearing with us. And again, I really pushed Jenna to do this one and I really appreciate it. So thank you. And then Jenna will be back to do one on DAX and MPLP, right? MP, more product, less. Yes. Okay. In September. So again, thank you everybody for joining us. And I will email out the recording probably tomorrow. But thank you so much for joining us and registering and showing up. But have a good night.
Right.
Thank you.